You are now live, Annette.
Hello, everyone. Glad to have you here. I am Annette Oltmans, founder and CEO of the M3ND Project. Thank you for joining us for this month's training intensive. Is there hope? An intensive about whether abusers can change. We provide free training intensives every month. So to find out more, visit our website, sign up for training newsletters, or follow us on social media. The M3ND Project, I just want to give you a little background, is a nonprofit organization that I founded in 2016 to educate, equip, and restore all those impacted by abuse. We teach survivors, we teach responders, therapists, faith-based leaders of all beliefs, and other nonprofits how to understand the complexities of mostly psychological abuse, because psychological abuse is present in all abuses, and how to respond to victims correctly in order to prevent adding further harm. And this is a real problem. We call this double abuse, which is the secondary harm that often occurs when victims reach out for help, but they are either inadvertently or sometimes intentionally harmed by those whom the victim trusts. Victims are often not believed, or they're judged, they're criticized, they're given incorrect instructions. Therapists often do this unintentionally. They're interrogated, they're asked pointed and leading questions. They may even be blamed for the abuse or given ultimatums. You need to do this, or we're not going to talk to you anymore, or we're not, if you don't stay married, then you're not part of our church anymore, things of that nature. And we call this double abuse. And there are many forms of double abuse, and those are just a few. Before we get started, I wanted to share some exciting news. We are launching our first public cohort for our Responding to Abuse curriculum. This is a new 7-week interactive online course starting September 15th. Each week, there are about 30 minutes of reading and some follow-up quizzes, and a 1-hour virtual live training that I lead, which includes an opportunity for questions and answers and interactive conversations. This comprehensive curriculum is for counselors, for faith leaders, for first responders, or anybody who responds, a family or friend to victims, and for victims as well, and for abusers, those who want to seek help and understand more about their behaviors. It's a comprehensive training, and this course will equip you with effective ways to quickly identify psychological abuse, or what we call covert emotional abuse, and respond according to best practices with correct types of compassion and care when a survivor of abuse turns to you. So sign up by August 29th and get exclusive access to the interactive online cohort that M3ND is hosting. Visit our website at M3NDproject.com, or access registration through the link that we are providing in the chat box on Zoom and the comments on Facebook. Okay, today we are going to address a question that is asked often. Is there any hope that an abuser can change? Many victims stay within destructive relationships, hanging on to any glimmer of hope that their abuser may change. Those who are helping victims may wonder if change is possible as well, and if they should be encouraging the victim with that hope. So is there hope that an abuser can change? The answer to this question largely depends on whether the abuser is willing to change. Far too often, abusers don't believe that they need to change. They don't want to change, and they refuse to take any steps towards change. If they are willing, and that's a big if, then of course change is possible and there is hope. But I want to communicate clearly that there can be hope, and at the same time, statistically speaking, many of those individuals who cause this type of harm will never change because they refuse to take the necessary and proactive steps towards change for any length of time. It might be just something very fleeting and temporary, an apology, but then the cycle begins again. The hope is that after a lot of hard work over the course of an extended period of time, abusers can change. Let's talk about that a little bit. Research shows that with dedication, intervention, possibly through a very strong batterers intervention program, abusers can change. For example, one study spent 4 years following 618 male abusers who entered batterer intervention programs in one of 4 cities, as well as their female partners, starting when the men entered the program. And let me just pause for a second. There are men who are victims of abuse too. And so I'm not in any way saying that that does not occur, but this study was of male abusers. So let's go on. The study found that at the 30-month follow-up period, more than 80% of the men had not re-assaulted their partner in the previous year. And at the 48th month mark, 90% of the men had not assaulted their partner in the past year. The treatment programs were small educational therapy groups, meeting at least once a week for between 4 months and a year. Men who completed the program were much less likely to abuse their partners. And this statistic may not be telling the full story. However, I want to emphasize this, because when a restraining orders are in place and the abuser is forced to enter a treatment program, and the abuser is prevented from having any contact with the victim, if they follow the court order, time passes, allowing the abuser to calm down rather than being embroiled in the relationship or conflict. So it's not necessarily that they didn't re-assault because of the batterers intervention program. It could be the time that was imposed on them to be separated from the spouse. So you just have to take both of those facts into consideration. Dr. Gondhoff, a professor emeritus at Indiana University of Pennsylvania, says, when someone is aware they need to change and take steps towards that change, it is possible for an abuser to end the harmful behavior pattern. However, more often than not, the abusive partner does not put in the work, or they may try for a short while until it becomes too challenging for them and they quit the process. Lundy Bancroft, a trusted expert in the field of abuse, notes that most abusers choose not to progress early on when they have to acknowledge their behavior was a choice and not a loss of control. You know, it was a conscious decision. And when they have to recognize how their abuse affected them, those who they harmed, they want to push that away. They don't want to look at that. And so in the act of taking 100% responsibility, they are usually very entrenched in wanting to avoid that. They would rather blame the other party. So as Lundy also says, an abuser can change, but most don't. It's complicated. Change is so very challenging for the abuser because it requires a complete shift of their worldview and belief systems. It's a deeply transformative process that requires significant work for a lifetime, really, because their entire life has been under one mindset. So it's something that they need to constantly think about. And only a few choose that lifelong road, change in their pathway. So imagine the world of politics for a moment. If your worldview is firmly rooted on the far right or the far left, and you were told by someone who intervened that you must make a complete paradigm shift, how hard do you think that might be? Would it entail, what would it entail to make such a change? How long do you think it might take? Or let's use another example. Consider religion. If you have a strong religious faith and you are confronted that your beliefs are rooted in falsehood and that you must abandon your beliefs and change, consider what that might entail for you to thoroughly change your mind and your spirit. And that is basically what an abuser has to do. They have to change their mind and their spirit from deep within. And that is not an easy process. I want to describe for you the worldview and belief system of an abuser. But before I do, I feel it's important for me to speak to victims of abuse and those of you who are helping victim survivors who are hoping their partner will change. What happens far too often when the one who's causing harm takes initial steps to get the help they need, the victim and those supporting the victim encourage them to reconcile the relationship at the first sign the abuser is getting help, or at the first sign the abuser makes what seems like an authentic apology. But as you can see from what Lundy and many other experts share, the one causing harm has a long road before them, and many of them do not remain with the program long enough to make any permanent change. One critical component for most relationships dedicated to ending the abusive cycle is for the couple to be physically separated for a healthy season while each individual is getting the help they need to reprogram their thinking. And I will talk a little bit more about this later. But when a victim ends that separation prematurely because their partner has started getting help or has made a seemingly authentic apology, it relieves the abuser of the burden they need to feel to encourage them to continue doing the hard work for the long haul, which facilitates their transformation. So if you minimize the ultimatums, if you reduce or erase the ultimatum and you don't stick with the separation, then the abuser doesn't have this driving motivation to change because you've taken the consequences away, and they like the way they are. They don't see any reason to change. They like power and control and intimidation. It's comfortable for them. So why would they change unless they are motivated to change? And I think it's really critical that victims understand that, and therapists too. It's important to remember that many abusers quit the process once they realize how difficult the work is, or when the boundary or ultimatum has been lifted too early. Too many victims return to the relationship prematurely and before the abuser has crossed this critical threshold in the recovery process. Statistics show that victims will leave their partner 6 or 7 times before they leave for good. And each time they come back, they go right back into the cycle of abuse. And this is one of those reasons, because the abuser doesn't change. Understandably, the faulty belief system and worldview of many abusers will help to put this into context. Many abusers have an entirely different worldview than a victim and the responder. Those who cause harm through abusive behaviors have entrenched faulty ideals and beliefs that place the abuser in a hierarchical position. Now, I'm not saying that they walk around and say that I am above you and you're below me. They may hide that very well, but intrinsically it is what they are feeling. And they may not even be fully aware of this, but it is well embedded in their beliefs. They have strong feelings of entitlement rooted deep within, where they that emboldens them to expect double standards. You know, this works for me, but it doesn't, I expect this for me, but I don't have to return the same treatment to you, things of that nature. And they will employ manipulative tactics so that they can maintain power and control. Abusers also display so on the one hand, they're controlling and they believe that they are entitled and that there's this hierarchical aspect. And then on the other side, they're very insecure. Abusers also display, because of these insecurities, very defensive responses when the victim attempts to have an authentic conversation about how the victim feels or how to resolve a conflict, for example. This is important for both the victim and the responder to understand and accept. A lot of what is behind abusive behaviors are learned attitudes and feelings of entitlement and privilege. In order for permanent change to take place, abusers must fully give up their sense of hierarchy and entitlement and make a complete change in how they believe the relationship should operate. And their defensiveness is caused by two separate and all-encompassing mindsets is how I like to think of it. The first is to avoid taking responsibility. So by being defensive and stonewalling a conversation and shutting the victim down, they're avoiding that reckoning moment where they have to really face their behaviors and apologize and make reparations commensurate with the harm that is caused. I mean, that is really what a healthy relationship does. They fix what they cause, and they do it in short order. And the other point is that they, how do I say this? They completely lack empathy and a sense of responsibility, but they also are operating from a really low emotional IQ. And this might seem counterintuitive because they may be very intelligent and accomplished, but a low IQ means that they are a low emotional IQ means that they are very uncomfortable and insecure with their lack of understanding their own emotions, and also insecure in their lack of understanding or being able to process the emotions of their partner. So to compensate for this, they shut the other partner down and power over them to stonewall any attempts for an authentic and meaningful emotional connection and conversation. It is extremely difficult for them to overcome these handicaps without firm boundaries, ultimatums, and interventions, because they're not even aware that their emotional IQ is at a lower level. They think they're successful and high functioning. And so this is another example of how they have a completely different worldview. They're operating by an entirely different playbook than the victim is. And so you cannot expect that your rational talking to them and your creative ways to get them to change is going to work, because they're not even relating to you on the same playing field. Abusers may also feel the need to control because of learned behavior in their upbringing, child neglect or abuse that has stunted their emotional health, or because of low esteem or jealousy, which is also rooted out of an unevolved emotional healthiness. So regulating emotions and feelings of anger is very difficult for an abusive person. They often have witnessed or experienced abuse themselves. Oftentimes they were victims in their childhood, and many times they have been this way for so many years that they don't realize anything is wrong. They think, this is just the way I am. I've been operating successfully my entire life. There's nothing wrong with me. And they often don't see a reason to change. They really don't see a reason to change. And they don't want to give up the power and control they've acquired through emotional or physical abuse. And like I said, abusers are also uncomfortable processing others' emotions. They have this lower IQ, even if they are competent and educated. So their lack of emotional understanding causes them to shut down and avoid developing knowledge about their own emotions. They are clueless. So some may refer to these mindsets as narcissistic. If that helps you to understand, you can do a lot of research on narcissistic abuse, but not all abusers are narcissists, because there's some abusers that have developed bad habits just from watching their family function. And by merely showing them the terms and definitions that we have on the glossary of terms and definitions that we have on our website, which defines specific covert emotional abusive behaviors, sometimes just showing them what those are will cause somebody who's not truly narcissistic, they will be able to say, wow, I can see that that's harmful. I didn't ever look at it through this clear lens, just, clearly defining this for me. So I want to try to stop doing that. Like they really from a wellspring inside themselves, but that's very few. Most are narcissists, and all narcissists are abusive. So using the word narcissism is to describe the multiple deep-seated beliefs the abuser has that motivates doing destructive behaviors. Excuse me. This is in contrast to those who participate in emotional abuse, but are not entrenched in a faulty belief system. So for example, some people rage. Well, not all people who rage feel entitled to rage. They simply may not be able to regulate the rage that they feel. And once they realize they are causing harm through their behaviors and that there is help to overcome this destructive behavior, many will actively engage in therapy to get the proper help that they need, and they can learn to regulate this rage. That is different than somebody who employs a lot of abusive behaviors and manipulative tactics to overpower someone. It's a lack of control. So it's different. Either way, a first responder can play a critical role in helping someone who is causing harm to get the help that they need. It's essential for those who are responding to abusers to hold them strictly accountable for their harmful behaviors and the change that is required of them, to not turn a blind eye, but to actually step in and say, whoa, stop that. That is not healthy, and I don't like it. They let them know that even though they may be unaware of how inappropriate it is, that others are not unaware. They are very aware. But sometimes abusers don't show these behaviors out in public because they are very motivated to manage their image. They know intrinsically something is not fully right with them. And so they hide and they put on a show of being super nice person and involve themselves in charity work and other ways to create an image of themselves that will overcompensate for what they are behind closed doors. While it's natural for responders to feel sympathy for an abuser who seemingly wants their relationship to work, we cannot allow sympathy to stop us from holding abusers accountable, which is the greatest and most effective response to the abuser we can have. It's vital for first responders to understand that there is no neutral position when it comes to abuse. And many of you that know a dynamic of a couple that is abusive, you just want to be vanilla and not get involved, and you want to play neutral. But if you try to take a neutral stand, you are benefiting one person only, and that's the abuser. And by doing so, you're actually re-traumatizing the victim considerably because you're not stepping in and advocating for them. So to take a neutral stand is actually colluding in abuse. And to learn more about how to properly interface with both the victim and abuser, because there's so much more that we have to say about this topic, please sign up for our Responding to Abuse 7-session curriculum. It is a very comprehensive curriculum, and I think that you will glean a lot more information than we're able to do in this intensive. Experts say that more than judges, lawyers, or police personnel, and even more than therapists, it's family, friends, and faith leaders who carry the most influence to help motivate an abuser to change. By pointing out and strongly disapproving of abusive behaviors, while at the same time empowering and supporting the victim and helping them set firm boundaries, the abuser can experience healthy shame, which may motivate them to get the expert help that they truly need. Some abusers need to be shown how their behaviors are sabotaging emotional connection and the ability to resolve conflict within their relationship. And they need to be shown how to allow their partner's voice to be heard. And people who are witnessing this interaction, and oftentimes you don't get to witness it, but if you do witness it, it's helpful to be bold and insert yourself, to say how uncomfortable that is, or wow, I would never talk to my spouse that way, or something along those lines, which we go greater in detail in our comprehensive curriculum. But to the abuser who wants to make a change, accountability through confrontation and experiencing firm ultimatums can be the catalyst to them taking the first steps. Dr. David Hawkins, who is the director of the Marriage Recovery Center, which we have vetted, and they do excellent work. He does excellent work working with abusers. He says that abusers need to experience a breakdown before they can experience a breakthrough. They need to experience the spouse demanding a separation, or a loss of privileges, or ultimatums that are followed through. These boundaries where, even though the ultimatums make the victim very uncomfortable, and often they're paying a price too, they need to be willing to follow through on those things for an abuser to have that breakdown experience. In most cases, however, when confronted on one behavior, so if you confront the abuser, you're minimizing me, for example, the abusers who are truly entrenched in their need for power and control, they might apologizing for minimizing, but they'll simply move to another abusive behavior, such as stonewalling or deflections. Or if you go to our website, you can see our complete glossary of terms and definitions for these types of behaviors. But the abuser is not making an authentic change in their worldview and in their mindset. They're just simply covertly trying to look as though they change, because authentic change is really intolerable for abusers. They simply avoid the confrontation by ceasing one abusive tactic and switching to another. And because they stop the one, the victim or the responder may feel that the confrontation was effective, but don't be fooled. You need to have a very discerning eye, and you need to be patient and give it time to see if there's long-standing evidence of change and if there's reparations. But connection or resolution will never occur, because if you allow a inauthentic apology, like I said earlier, or if you don't recognize their shift in behavior, and you don't hold them accountable, then it's an inauthentic change, and simply moved from one behavior to another in order for them to maintain power and control. And this is very common and a telltale sign of an abuser who is so entrenched in their faulty thinking that they may never change. So that's a lot. What happens when an abuser is confronted? They may feel angry, they may feel embarrassed or humiliated. Oftentimes they're going to feel very entitled to fight back because of their own mindset and their faulty thinking. They don't believe that they need to take responsibility for any behavior. They aren't used to doing that, and they don't feel they need to. They avoid it at all costs. But it's still necessary to do it, because confrontation may hurt their feelings, but it does not cause them harm. As Dr. Henry Cloud, another expert in the field, says, there's a big difference between hurt and harm. We all hurt sometimes when we have to face hard truths about ourselves, but it makes us grow. And that's what we hope, right? When we're confronting an abuser. And Henry goes on to say, it can be the source of huge growth. That's not harmful. Harm is when you damage someone. Facing reality is usually not a damaging experience, even though it can hurt. So damage is what a victim experiences from abuse and the effects of trauma. And that is not what an abuser experiences. They experience hurt and healthy shame. We are not harming an abuser through confrontation. And it's important for us to allow them to feel hurt by the confrontation. And in fact, a lot of therapists believe, well, they didn't hire me to confront, so I'm not going to play that role. But then you are colluding in abuse, particularly if you have both a connection with the victim and the abuser. It requires confrontation. And once confronted, they will only change if they both want to change and take 100%. If they, let me say that different. That sounded like I was talking about the victim and the abuser. If the abuser both wants to change and takes 100% of the responsibility, that means 100% of the responsibility, not 80%, 60%, or any other percentage. This means none of the blame can be placed on the victim, regardless of how he or she has responded to the abuse. That's secondary. That is a reactive defense or a reactive abuse, which is not rooted in a faulty mindset. It is a very different type of motivation or mindset. In most cases, an abuser requires a total intervention in their only hope for change. Abusers need to experience this breakdown before the breakthrough, and the intervention facilitates this process. So what are the ways an intervention can take place? Excuse me 1 second. First, in most cases, it's imperative for the couple to physically separate, which I've already stated, and for an extended period of time where each person is getting individual treatment, which I will discuss in a moment. But deciding to separate can be a very difficult decision to make as well as to maintain, but often it is the only hope for the relationship in the long run. Now, oftentimes when a victim decides to set this boundary and separate, the abuser will completely abandon the relationship and immediately go and find another person. But this is something that the victim needs to prepare for, that there is no easy way for an abuser to change. You can continue to live in the cycle of abuse, but you will continue to compromise yourself and be traumatized and compromise your health. And is it worth it? You really have to consider what your choices are and make an autonomous decision. And so a separation doesn't always work, but it often does. So you need to be prepared that when you make those decisions, you're setting a firm boundary, and there are going to be some reactions to that. So Lundy Bancroft recommends that the couple be separated with no contact. That's no texting, no phone calls, nothing, for 3 months or more. I think that is too short a period of time, but I would say no contact for 3 months, and then you can text and communicate, but remain separated. Sometimes jail time will serve as an intervention. Other times, the abuser should be forced to leave the home, or the victim and children will need to leave if they're living together. Abusers who are the most motivated to change have typically lost 2 or 3 prior relationships because of abuse. So they get to a place where they're willing to say, well, it wasn't that person. If it happened there and it happened there, it must not be their fault. Maybe it's me. But that does not always happen. Second, during the time of separation, the abuser needs to get individualized treatment with a professional or program specializing in abuse, such as, and I'm so sorry. Such as an expert therapist. And you really need to vet that, because a lot of times when you shop for therapists, and yes, it's okay to shop for therapists, some may say, oh yes, I can handle that, believing that they can, but they've never received continuing education units on how to work with a narcissist or an abuser. And so you need to really vet that out. What is their training? And have them specifically outline that for you. How much training? How many hours of training? How many clients have they helped? And how have they done that? You will intuitively hear and know whether that seems like it would work or not. But we have resources for you. You can reach out to us and we will help you. There's also a batterer's intervention program for the abuser. But I want to be very clear that in the beginning, the intensive therapy should not be done as a couple. So oftentimes, many times, couples seek couples counseling, and the therapist who has not been trained tries to work on this as a mutual problem. And like I mentioned before, it is 100% the abuser's fault until abuse has been fully uncovered, really specifically identified, and with specific confrontations of each type of abusive behavior that's being employed. And until it has been resolved over an extended period of time, couples therapy is strictly contraindicated. Otherwise, it's just more traumatizing for the victim to be placed in a position of having to be responsible for the abuser's behaviors. And a lot of therapists don't even know about this protocol because they haven't been trained. So there again, it's important to shop for a therapist. So the whole point of couples counseling is that two people work together to find a resolution. And the therapist does not fully align with the victim. But when you are a victim of abuse, you need 100% alignment and support by your therapist in order for you to get the help that you truly need to heal and overcome abuse. In couples therapy, there's this sense of mutual responsibility, and we want to avoid that at all costs. So I want to be clear, no problems in the relationship can be worked out before abuse has been thoroughly uncovered and resolved over an extended period of time, where reparations from even prior abuses has been thoroughly made. So if the abuser has slandered you, he or she has gone and fixed that with public acknowledgement, where you've been copied on the email or something, or however you need to have that resolved, that is resolved accordingly. An abusive person is not able to do these sorts of things until quite some time in intensive therapy or other treatment. Experts agree that it takes a long time, and it usually requires group treatment as well as individual treatment, such as through a reputable batterer's intervention program of 1 or 2 years or more, or if the abuse therapist offers groups for abusers only, that can work as well, as long as they're meeting at least one time a week. So I often use the work of Lundy Bancroft because his experience and descriptions are so accurate and helpful. So this is a mouthful. Lundy will say that for an abuser to demonstrate change, these things need to be evident, and it's a long list. The abuser needs to fully admit their wrongdoing. They need to stop blaming others and stop making excuses. They need to accept responsibility by making amends and following through with reparations measurable to the harm done. They need to recognize that abuse is a choice. It is not an accident. It might be a mistake, but it is a choice that they're making, and it is never the victim's fault. They need to identify patterns of controlling behavior that they use and accept that overcoming abusiveness is a decades-long process, not declaring themselves cured, not demanding credit for improvements they've made, not treating improvements as a voucher to be spent on occasional acts of abuse, but developing respectful, kind, and supportive behaviors, carrying their weight and sharing power with their partner in a sense of equality. Change how they respond to their partners or former partners' angers and grievances. And yes, Victims are allowed to be angry and allowed to complain and say what their needs are, and the abuser needs to be responsive in a healthy and kind way. And the abuser needs to change how they act in heated conflicts and accept the consequences of their actions, including not feeling sorry for themselves about the consequences and not blaming their partner or their children for the consequences that they're facing. Okay, so that was a mouthful, but it's important. That shows you how extensive it really needs to be. So overcoming abusiveness is often an ongoing, lifelong process. If an abuser has shown and proven to take steps to make changes by attending counseling, completing extended group therapy or a batterer's intervention program, and the victim has witnessed repentance, a consistent time of change in their behavior without a lapse for an extended period of time, then a relationship can to rebuild and repair. But setbacks are inevitable. How quickly, and so if there are setbacks, how quickly and thoroughly the abuser corrects the situation. In cases of solely emotional abuse, I'm not putting physical abuse into this category, because I think if there's physical abuse, you need to completely remove yourself from that situation. But if there is emotional abuse and the abuser quickly corrects the situation and does it in a thorough and measurable way, that shows signs of improvement, because we all have a bad moment and we'll have a setback, but it's the recovery time that really makes a difference. So sorry. Okay. Third, the victim needs to do their own work in order to get stronger in themselves and gain a strong sense of autonomy. And I cannot overemphasize this enough. Most often, this requires significant time in individual therapy with somebody who specializes in narcissistic abuse recovery and trauma. Victims can find incredible healing through domestic violence agencies who offer a wide variety of healing modules, like personal empowerment programs and counseling services and support groups, usually free of charge to the victim. But it takes a victim a long time to learn what they need to learn to change, because there are two people in this dynamic. Now, it is not the victim's fault. I am not in any way saying that, but the victim is not walking their life with full autonomy. There is a trauma bond, and there are other deep connections with somebody who is very unhealthy, and you need to examine what those are and why they are so. And I'll get into that in a little bit, but it's important also for victims to know that they cannot control anyone else, no matter how creative they frame their words or how carefully they walk their life on eggshells. They cannot change anyone else. They can only change themselves, and they shouldn't be walking on eggshells. That is no way to live. They should be living in a freely open sense of communication where they're allowed to thrive and be their best self. They can't make the abuser change. Only abusers can make the decision to change themselves. The victim will not be able to come up with any trick or quest internally in the relationship to be able to change another person. You can only change yourself. The victim can help the abuser consider change by setting firm boundaries and naming specific abusive behaviors that are causing harm. So I recommend that you go onto our website and really get familiar with the terms and definitions, because you can confront and say, you're minimizing me, you're stonewalling me, and change the dynamic of the argument, where before that you felt like it was crazy making and you couldn't figure out what was happening, now you can confront those things, which is helpful for you to gain a sense of control over yourself. And it's helpful for the abuser to have mirrored back how they're behaving. But you might ask yourselves, once all of this has happened, when is reconciliation possible? Like, is there any point where you can really reconcile? Reconciliation is complex, and very few get to the point of reconciliation. And I know I just discussed like Lundy Bancroft's list of things that need to take place, but like I also said, many victims of abuse return to their partners several times before they are truly ready to completely abandon an abusive relationship. And so you have to consider reconciliation versus abandoning the relationship. And I cannot overstate it enough that the road to healing is challenging and formidable. The person being harmed is the best source and authority for determining how the abuser is doing. So if the person being harmed is feeling these manipulative things that are continuing to happen, even though they might appear on the outside apologetic or be putting on a public image that they've changed, the only person who can measure that accurately is the victim themselves. Reconciliation is always the victim's choice. Abusers may want it, insist on it, plead for it, and even be ready for it, but the victim has to be the one who chooses reconciliation. And it is really unfair and wrong for anyone on the outside to judge what the victim's choice is, because no one has walked in the victim's shoes and experienced the trauma over such an extended period of time. And it's really about what the victim is capable of and what they choose to do. There's no judgment in that. And we need to allow victims to make those decisions freely and support them. In order for the victim to be able to choose reconciliation, their traumatic symptoms from the abuse that they've experienced must no longer be debilitating, or they're just going to simply be triggered by so many things that the abuser says and does. They must have worked through their fear of abandonment, if that was what was keeping them connected to the abuser, or other childhood traumas that were causing them to lose their autonomy, that are causing them to remain in the abusive relationship. They also need to truly, from deep inside themselves, give up on concerns for what other people think. So often victims are caught up in a religious or social influence group where the victim gives up his or her autonomy to others' opinions. The victim needs to realize that they are an adult and can only control themselves, and they don't need approval from outsiders. So we've covered a lot today, and yet there's still so much more to say around this topic. So for further information, I hope that you will sign up for our virtual 7-session comprehensive curriculum titled Responding to Abuse. And you can find the link on the M3ND Project's website at themnproject.com. But before I take questions, I want to, it's important to caution all involved that when a victim sets boundaries for the first time, the abuser may get worse, crash through, or overpower those boundaries. And it's essential that the victim prepare themselves for what that might look like, and not give in to that pressure. The victim's trauma, I'm so sorry, you guys. The victim's trauma will likely increase during this time when the abuser is crashing through a boundary. And so you really need community support. You need to have someone who's going to be with you, and you need good therapeutic help. It's also important to note that some abusers increase physical violence during this time, and domestic homicide actually increases substantially when victims try to leave. Therefore, safety and a thoroughly thought out exit plan must be the victim's #1 concern. And the victim is going to instinctively know whether their abuser is likely to be violent. And on the internet, there's a lot of ways to assess, predict domestic homicide by certain things that the abuser has done. And I encourage you to look for those. But for advice on how to devise a safety plan, please contact your local domestic violence agency. So we've talked about a lot about how an abuser might change, but in no way am I suggesting that a victim hold on to hope for change. The numbers are very low, and it's much more important that a victim focus on getting stronger in order to handle the emotions of a decision to leave. There is a resource for women only. I wish there was a resource for men that I knew about, but sadly I don't. But there is a resource for women, and it's called Flying Free Now with Natalie Hoffman. She has a podcast that is very helpful, and she has twice a year, she opens up a private Facebook group that walks women through the process of getting stronger and leaving. And it's a really comprehensive program that I encourage you to take advantage of if this is the path that you want to take. The bottom line is no one deserves to be abused. No one needs to remain in a relationship or a living situation where they are being harmed emotionally, mentally, or physically, no matter the oaths they have taken or promises they've made. Any act or threat of violence breaks any oath that was taken, whether you find yourself in an abusive relationship or as a responder to an abusive relationship. The health and safety of the individuals and children in the relationship needs to be the priority. So I want to wrap this up because we have only 10 minutes. If to respect your time, I'll stay on as long as you'd like. But if you'd like any resources, please reach out to us and please sign up for our training. And thank you for joining us. I really appreciate having you here. And you can email me at the M3ND Project. It's Annette at M3NDproject.com, and I will answer your questions. So I'll take any questions that we have now.
Great, Annette, we do have a handful of questions here. So this has been a rich time. Really appreciate this session, and we have some really great feedback. So I will go ahead and jump in for time's sake. The first question is, my son grew up watching me be physically, mentally, emotionally abused. He's never been physically abusive in his relationship, but I do see the control and emotional/verbal abuse. How can I help him? He is aware. How can I support and encourage change?
Mm-mm. Boy, that's a tough one. I would really encourage you to go to our website and go to our terms and our glossary of terms and definitions, because it defines those specific emotional behaviors. And also, I would encourage you to Google ways to increase your emotional IQ. There's a wonderful book that I can't remember the title right now, but I will, Jill, can we do that? Can we post that later?
Yes, this live session will be up on Facebook, so we can actually drop anything in the comments there.
That's great. So I will, it's a Daniel Goleman book. And I really encourage you to have him read it. And it really emphasizes the importance of increasing your emotional IQ. And usually when you increase your emotional IQ, you have a lesser need for control because you are comfortable with other emotions that you're masking by controlling to shut those other emotions down that haven't been allowed to grow in a healthy, parent modeling relationship. So that would be my first go-to suggestion.
Okay, great. We have another question here. And it says, I find myself wondering whether more abusers would change if people actually held them accountable. I have never seen an abuser held accountable, and I wonder if the low odds of an abuser changing have to do with our response as a society to them. What are your thoughts?
I could not agree more. We turn a blind eye. We don't want to get involved. And we can't imagine that our friend who we go hang out with could possibly be abusive behind closed doors. There's such an ignorance and a taboo topic. It's so in the shadows. It's a taboo topic. We don't talk about abuse openly as a society. There's a lot of shame and disgust even associated around it. But if we all increased our emotional IQ and could talk about these behaviors that were in fact manipulative and controlling, and bring it into our common everyday conversation and bring it into society, it would help victims of schoolyard bullying. It would help victims in a toxic work environment. It would help couples. It would help so many, parent-child situations, but we just don't talk about it. And that's one of the things that we're really trying to do here at the Men Project, is to raise awareness, to be able to understand that this covert emotional abuse is pervasive in our society. It's actually it's an epidemic. And when we see it, we need to confront it and just say that's out of line and say it. But unfortunately, there's a lot of people who are conflict averse, and they just aren't going to step into that role, but doesn't make it right.
Yeah. Okay, we have a couple more questions here. This one says, I feel so much anger at this point in the relationship. Confronting her doesn't go well because I do it in an angry way, and that makes things worse. How do you get to the point that you're confronting in an effective way?
Boy, I honestly, if you're at the beginning of the question, is this a victim of abuse?
Yes.
So if you are, I honestly don't think it should matter whether you're angry or not. If you were dealing with a healthy person, they would be able to recognize that your anger is coming from a correct place. That's what empathetic people do. They try to understand where their spouse is coming from, and they give them grace. But oftentimes an abuser is so entrenched in that power and control that when they experience your anger, then they just blame you and say, well, look at how you're behaving, and you just called me a jerk, and I can't believe you just called me a name, or whatever. They blame you for being angry, and they make it all be your fault. And that's why it's very hard to get out of that reactive mode when you are being traumatized. That's why it's so important to get a lot of healing, work on getting stronger, detach yourself emotionally from your abuser. If you don't want to exit the relationship, you need to emotionally detach from that person and not expect any needs to be met, because they won't. As you work in therapy on yourself to get stronger and really find your autonomy, and it's a deep work, but until you do that process, you're not going to be able to lower your involuntary reaction of anger. And it is involuntary. It's trauma causes fight, flight, freeze, or appease. So we either appease and accommodate, or we walk away or flee, or we freeze, we don't know what to say, or we fight. I am one that fights back. And so I understand your anger, but you're not going to be able to control those involuntary responses until you really work on your trauma and detach emotionally or leave the relationship. I hope that helps.
It does. And Annette, it's interesting because the person asking the question just wrote, the fact that the victim was male is key, because him like becoming angry might make him look like the abuser, even though he's the victim. And it is so tricky.
It really is. And because you're a man, I want to really caution you to think about a separation, or really do this deep work, because it is so common that you will be blamed for being abusive, and that can have real costly ramifications. So you really need to do what it takes to get to where you need to be.
Okay, I have one more question here, Annette.
Sure.
And that is, many people in my church view separation as preparation for divorce. This is super common. It's strictly frowned upon. I feel like if I separated, my husband would get all of the support because I would be viewed as the person leaving the marriage. How do I handle this?
That's what happened to me when I separated. And it is very overwhelming to deal with, to deal with being mischaracterized by your social circle of influence, by your church circle of influence. But one of the things that a victim needs to work on, which I mentioned in this talk today, is to find a place of autonomy where you are not dependent on other people's points of views to determine who you are as a person or whether you are right or wrong as a person. And that is very challenging, but that's the kind of strength that you can look as a goal. That's where you actually need to get to be so strong in yourself that you are not going to be influenced by others. That's the kind of strength that it really takes to follow through. And so that's what I want you to be working on so that you can tolerate that. You can also go to a church pastor and show them the terms and definitions and the types of abuse experiences that we have on our website that will help to define abuse, or you can show them our website. And sometimes it's really helpful that they see in writing from a Christian, a faith-based organization that this is abuse. Oftentimes they don't understand that emotional abuse is a form of abuse, is a form of domestic violence. And so, and that separation, what you could also say, which we cover in our curriculum that I've been promoting, is what a controlled separation looks like, where there are parameters and mutual agreed upon criteria. I'm sorry, I lost that word. Criteria for how each person will behave during the separation in terms of finances, in terms of relationships, friendships, who you confide in, who you don't. Like, there's a whole list. And that can also make it not seem like you are just abandoning the relationship, but you're entitled to abandon abuse because of the trauma. And I think that's another important point to emphasize, is that you probably have post-traumatic stress disorder, because most victims do. And it's important that you take care of yourself. And if there are children, that you're not modeling this type of relationship in the family, because it carries over. It's cyclical, as we just heard from one of our other questions. It might not carry over in the exact way, but it does carry over. It creates miniature victims and miniature abusers. And we need to really think about the developmental stages of children's lives, and that we protect that with a healthy environment. So I hope that was helpful.
That's great. This is such a big, important topic, and I know we've covered a lot. So we really appreciate all these questions too. It really helps to.
Yes, thank you for your questions. Those are great questions.
And that is all we have, Annette. So you.
Okay. Well, thank you again for joining us. I hope that you will reach out to us if this has sparked any questions or concerns, or if you would like any resources. We're here to help you always. And until next time, have a great day.